There are more twists and turns in the White House than on the Le Mans circuit. One moment it's tariffs, yes. Then tariffs, no. Then tariffs, yes again. But this time, the USMCA is left out. Yesterday, Thursday, was a nerve-wracking day for many major companies in the US, Mexico, and Canada.
U.S. backtracks on Canada-Mexico tariffs in latest sharp shift on trade. Donald Trump's administration has backtracked in a major climb down from its aggressive trade agenda.
For now, friends, it looks like Canada is winning the battle. At 12:01 a.m. on March 4th, Canada and Mexico woke up to new US tariffs. At 12:01 a.m. on March 4th, Canada and Mexico woke up to new US tariffs. 25% on all products except Canadian energy, which was hit with a 10% duty. These tariffs lasted about 2 days, but what a 2 days they were. The knives were sharper than ever, and in Canada, this trade war has been taken almost as if it were a battle of missiles and cannon fire. Some statements from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and a few regional premiers are already making history.
So today, the United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator.
That's how a press conference began, where Trudeau was about to bring out the heavy artillery against Trump. More than a trade war, what we've seen over the past 2 days is a political war. In fact, we talked about the tariffs on Canada just yesterday on our sister channel, VisualPolitik. But beyond the economic implications, this has also been, and still is, a political battle. Trudeau spoke directly to American and Canadian families and told them the truth, that there are no winners in a trade war, that this would lead to American job losses, and that supermarket prices and housing costs and car prices would go up. But perhaps the most surprising moment came right after, when he spoke directly to Donald Trump.
Now I want to speak directly to one specific American, Donald. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We two friends fighting is exactly what our opponents around the world want to see. And now, to my fellow Canadians, I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be tough, even though we're all going to pull together, because that's what we do.
Friends, the Canadians have had enough, and this time, they're not bluffing. The situation is serious. And remember, tariffs, even though they've been mostly postponed for another month, are still looming over the relationship between these two major partners. And they're generating enormous distrust, not just in the markets, but among Canadians and Americans themselves. Relations between these two nations have never, at least in recent history, been this bad, and with good reason. Trump wants to tighten trade with Canada, but there's one thing even he can't afford to do: shake up one of the most crucial commercial relationships, the auto industry. The trade volume between the US and Canada, including both finished vehicles and components, exceeds $110 billion annually. The American auto industry is so interconnected with Canada and Mexico that some parts and components can cross borders up to 8 times before being installed in the final vehicle. With these tariffs, every time a part crosses the border, it would be hit with a 25% duty. That's just insane. That's why, when Trump announced this trade war, the giants of the industry went straight for the White House. Executives from companies like General Motors, Stellantis, and Ford spoke directly with Trump to tell him, "Mr. President, you are without a doubt the greatest genius to ever set foot in the White House when it comes to trade. No one understands the market better than you. No one negotiates like you. That being said, and with all due respect, are you absolutely sure these tariffs are the brilliant move they seem to be? Because of course your vision is unmatched, but some of us in the industry are a little concerned. You know, production costs could skyrocket, prices would follow, sales could plummet, and we might have to lay off thousands of workers. And well, you know how these people get when they lose their jobs, Mr. President. They tend to get angry. And when they get angry, sometimes they do irrational things like voting for the Democrats in the midterms. But hey, who am I to tell you anything about strategy? If anyone has it under control, it's you. And the thing is, shortly after these conversations, Trump backed down and put a 30-day pause on all goods covered under the USMCA. And that's when things started to fall apart for the US president. So far, Trump's tariff wars are having the exact opposite effect of what the MAGA hardliners wanted. America's trade deficit has hit a record $131 billion in January. American companies have rushed to buy from abroad, stockpiling before the tariffs take effect. Nothing like this happened during Trump's first-term trade wars, and that's because now the level of distrust is huge. The feeling is that Trump 2.0 is going full speed with no brakes, making sharp turns left and right as if nothing matters, without a single reasonable voice around him to set any limits. And that's bad for Americans. But the real problem is that when you're playing with others, things can turn against you. In fact, this time, the Canadians have gone all in. And you know what's most important? Trump has actually managed to unite the country. He's brought Canada together around a common adversary, the United States itself. It doesn't matter if you look to the left or the right, whether it's Trudeau's Liberal Party or Poilievre's Conservatives. On this issue, all parties are aligned. There's national unity. And maybe that's what Trump didn't account for. Because when an entire nation stands together for a cause, it becomes much harder to break. And if you don't believe me, listen to the Premier of Ontario, from the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, a liberal conservative party.
We said we'd never start a trade and tariff war with the U.S., but you better believe we're ready to win one. But together, we're going to stand up for Canada. We're going to get through this more united than ever before. Together, we're going to protect the true north strong and free.
I told you these past few days have been intense, didn't I? Didn't believe me? Well, Canada has gone into full battle mode. But of course, this raises a few questions. First, how are Canadians planning to face Trump's tariffs if they actually get fully implemented? What can a sparsely populated country with a relatively small economy do to stand up to a giant like this? Well, what we're about to tell you is something I'm sure will surprise many of you. Because maybe the fact that Americans and Canadians are practically like siblings in history also means that when things get rough, they could be quite similar. Nothing stands in their way. Pay close attention.
Canada's counterattack.
Now, we have no choice. We have to respond. Earlier this morning, Prime Minister Trudeau and his team announced retaliatory tariffs. They have my full support for a strong and forceful response. Tariff for tariff, dollar for dollar.
Canada has made one thing clear. If Trump fully imposes tariffs, they won't just sit back and watch. Anyone who thought Canadians would take this quietly was dead wrong. This time the response will be swift and forceful. Trudeau has left no room for doubt. His government won't just impose retaliatory tariffs, they're also considering measures that will hit key sectors of the US economy. To start, a tariff package of up to 25% on strategic US exports, a direct hit to critical industries. In Ontario, Premier Ford has announced a 25% surcharge on Canadian electricity exports to 3 US border states, and they've even threatened to cut off power completely in April. And that's not all. Ontario, the province with Canada's strongest economy, is also shutting its doors to American business. They've even stopped buying American bourbon, because in case you didn't know, alcohol distribution and sales in Canada are controlled by government monopolies in almost every province, not private businesses.
Bourbon is banned, California wine canceled, as Canada pulls U.S. alcohol. Canadian provinces have restricted American alcohol sales as part of retaliatory measures against President Trump's tariffs. Canada pulling U.S. alcohol off shelves, worse than tariffs, says Jack Daniels maker Brown-Forman.
And this VisualPolitik community is a reality that will likely remain, tariffs or no tariffs. Because even if bans on American products are lifted, many Canadians will still be checking labels before they buy. As we said, the damage is already done. For example, with large-scale tariffs in place, US companies could no longer bid on infrastructure projects in the region. And even if that scenario doesn't happen, it's now very likely that American businesses will have a much harder time operating in Canada, especially when it comes to government contracts. Right now, the sentiment in Canada is that anything associated with the US has become toxic. And that, of course, includes Elon Musk. In fact, Ontario has just cancelled a $100 million deal with Starlink. And it doesn't stop there. The anger is so widespread that hundreds of thousands of Canadians have signed a petition to revoke Musk's citizenship. Because yes, if you didn't know, besides being South African and American, Musk is also Canadian. In fact, he became a Canadian citizen 13 years before he got his US citizenship.
And if they go further into April, then we'll cut off their electricity. I feel terrible because they're great governors. I know all three of them. I've worked well with them. I've met them all. We've had them to Ontario. They're great people. And I have to apologize to the governors and the American people.
Pay attention because things are about to get even more interesting. The message is clear. If the US wants to play dirty, Canada can too. And this is where their biggest weapon comes into play: energy. Because we're not just talking about electricity cuts, not at all. Canada is one of the main suppliers of oil and gas to the United States. In fact, the US buys a staggering $100 billion worth of energy supplies from Ottawa every year. And Trudeau knows it. Oh, he knows it very well. That's why he has already hinted at the ultimate threat. If the US imposes full tariffs, Canada could block or limit energy exports in response. The consequence is a full-blown economic earthquake in the United States. American refineries could struggle to secure enough cheap crude oil, causing fuel prices to skyrocket, a direct hit to the average citizen's wallet. But that's just the beginning. This could also cost tens of thousands of jobs in key states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the very places where Trump promised an industrial revival. And that's not all. Natural gas exports are also on the table. If Canada shuts off the supply, the US energy infrastructure will feel the shockwave, big time. And what about critical minerals? Canada is a key player in the production of strategic minerals for technology and military industries. If they restrict exports, the manufacturing of batteries, semiconductors, and other essential products could take a massive hit. And here's the thing, this isn't just speculation. These are real threats that have already been discussed by Trudeau and several regional premiers. Everything we're telling you right now are the weapons Canada has already put on the table. This is Canada's heavy economic artillery. But wait, because there's more.
I love hunting in Canada, and I love my neighbors to the north, but I'm not particularly sure that's the world's greatest idea. Listen, Canada is a proud country. We ought to respect that. We've had such a positive relationship. I hope the people of Canada know that this trade war is not how most Americans feel.
Canada isn't just responding with economic measures, they've also launched a diplomatic offensive aimed directly at the governors of the most affected US states. Trudeau and the regional premiers have already begun pressuring American state leaders, urging them to push back against the White House and get Trump to drop the tariff idea once and for all, especially the governors of states that depend heavily on trade with Canada, many of whom are already speaking out about the economic damage these tariffs could cause. Take Michigan, for example. The state exports over $27 billion worth of goods to Canada every year. A full-scale trade war could directly threaten the economic stability of these states, increasing pressure on Trump. Honestly, the situation is crazy, and Trump is running out of arguments. Because let's be real, that whole Canadian fentanyl threat excuse, it's flimsy at best, if not completely absurd. Because yes, overnight, Canada has suddenly become a massive problem for Trump, who now claims it's a gateway for fentanyl, the drug killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. The problem? This excuse for imposing large-scale tariffs on Canada is exactly that, just an excuse to sell the idea internationally. The reality, once again, is not on Trump's side. Pay attention.
Fentanyl, the worst excuse.
In 2024 alone, US authorities seized nearly 9,600 kilos of fentanyl. Considering that a person can overdose on just 2 milligrams, that amount is absolutely insane. But do you know what the real issue is? We're not even talking about Canada right now. We're talking about Mexico. Do you know how much fentanyl was seized at the Canadian border? 19 kilos. Yes, you heard that right, 19. You can fit an entire year's worth of fentanyl seizures from Canada into a single suitcase. Logically, you'd think Trump would be furious with Mexico. If he's this hostile toward Canada, surely he must hate Claudia Sheinbaum, right? Well, no. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Just take a look at these sweet words from Trump himself.
After speaking with President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, I have agreed that Mexico will not be required to pay tariffs on anything. Our relationship has been a very good one, and we are working hard together on the border. Thank you to President Sheinbaum for your hard work and cooperation.
With Scheinbaum, for some reason, it's all kind words. And do you know why that might be? Because Trump knows that the real fentanyl problem is Mexico, not Canada. And it's much smarter to stay on good terms with Mexico's president to ensure cooperation rather than to pick a fight. But with Trudeau, no such friendly words. When Trump suspended the tariffs on USMCA goods yesterday, he didn't say a single word about Trudeau. Not a thing. Yet, just 2 days ago, on Wednesday, Trump suggested that Trudeau is using the tariff dispute as a way to cling to power.
Trudeau was unable to tell me when the Canadian election is taking place, which made me curious, like, what's going on here? I then realized he is trying to use this issue to stay in power.
But come on, Donald, if you really think that, then why are you making it so easy for him? This makes no sense. And here's the thing, Canada and the US are facing practically the same fentanyl crisis. Just take a look at this chart. The opioid death rates in the US and Canada are strikingly similar, and they've risen at almost the same pace. In fact, this isn't talked about as much, because Canada has a much smaller population. But in 2023 alone, more than 8,000 Canadians died from opioid overdoses, over 80% of them from fentanyl. And for a country with just over 41 million people, that's an enormous number. In other words, both countries are suffering from the same crisis. And if we go by the data, the real source of the problem is far more in Mexico than in Canada. So why not fight this crisis together, instead of turning against each other and launching a trade war? Is fentanyl really what Trump cares about? Spoiler, we don't think so. At this point, and after everything we've seen, it's much more likely that Trump's real goal is to weaken Canada's economy as much as possible. That whole 51st state joke? Yeah, it might not be so much of a joke inside Trump's head anymore. Yes, this all sounds crazy and nonsensical, but honestly, it looked like a tough negotiation tactic to extract some kind of concession. The problem? So far, it's not at all clear what Trump actually wants from America's best ally. And at this point, we can't rule out that the 51st states talk is serious. After all, we're talking about a guy who cut off military aid to Ukraine overnight and blocked their access to US intelligence, leaving them unable to even launch guided rockets with their HIMARS. So, what if Trump is far more serious than many people think? However, there is one thing Trump is actually right about, and it's something both countries should be worried about. We've told you that fentanyl trafficking from Canada to the US is minimal, but there is something that should concern both nations. Back in 2000, the DEA considered that fentanyl proliferation in Canada had a limited impact. However, by 2019, the DEA described Canada as one of the entry points for fentanyl powders from China, as well as a hub for precursors used to cut the drug. And this market works like a snowball. If it's not stopped in time, it eventually turns into an avalanched. In the past 3 years, several shipments of fentanyl produced in Canada have been intercepted in New Zealand, Japan, and Australia. In Australia, for example, authorities seized 11.2 kilos of pure fentanyl in August 2022, enough for over 5 million lethal doses. So let's be clear, it's false that Canada is the root of the problem. And of course, it's ridiculous to compare Canada to Mexico when it comes to drug production and distribution. But it is true that Canada has become an exporter of fentanyl and is producing more than its domestic market consumes. And that's exactly where the US and Canada needs to work together to prevent this production from growing further. Which, by the way, they're already doing. But apparently, that wasn't enough for Trump to avoid launching this messy trade war.
We launched a $1.3 billion border plan that is already showing results, because we too are devastated by the scourge that is fentanyl, a drug that has torn apart communities and caused so much pain and torment for countless families across Canada, just like in the United States.
When it comes to this issue, either the 3 North American countries, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, work together, or there simply won't be a viable solution. That being said, Trump can't exactly claim to have clean hands here either. Let me explain. If we're going to start pointing fingers, Canada has plenty of reasons to speak up too. Every year, hundreds of illegal firearms cross the border from US into Canada. In fact, by 2024, a staggering 88% of the 717 guns seized in Canadian crimes were traced back to the United States. So while Trump complains about fentanyl coming in from the north, Canadians could just as easily complain, and with good reason, about the guns flowing in from the south. At the end of the day, one thing is clear: tariffs, threats, and political insults won't do anything to solve these problems. And that's exactly why we believe that wherever Trump's real motives are for triggering this trade war with Canada, fentanyl is definitely not one of them. But now, it's your turn. What do you think about Canada's reaction to Trump's tariffs? Do you think they will ever actually be enforced, or will they just keep getting suspended month after month? And after everything we've explained, do you really think fentanyl is the real reason Trump is taking action against Ottawa? Well, let us know your thoughts down in the comments, and let's open the debate. And most importantly, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. As always, thank you very much for being here. All the best. See you next time.